The drive up to the lake house used to be the best part of my week. 2 hours north of Columbus, through the kind of Ohio countryside that doesn't care what year it is. Just flat farmland giving way to tree line, then the road narrowing, then the smell of pine and cold water coming through the vents before you even rolled the window down. My late wife, Sandra, and I bought that property 31 years ago for $82,000. We thought we were out of our minds, a retired science teacher and a high school football coach, stretching ourselves thin for 40 acres and a 3-bedroom cabin on Buckeye Lake. Best decision we ever made. Sandra passed 6 years ago. Breast cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. After that, the lake house became the place I went when the walls of my Columbus house started closing in. I'd drive up on a Friday afternoon, sit on the back porch with a thermos of coffee, watch the fog come off the water. In the morning, nobody needed anything from me up there. I was just a 64-year-old man and a lake and whatever was left of the quiet. I should tell you about my son before I tell you the rest of this. Kyle is 31, 6'2", good-looking, got his mother's eyes and my stubbornness. He's always been the kind of person who lands on his feet. Not because he works particularly hard, but because he's charming enough that someone always catches him. When he was 23, I co-signed his first apartment lease because his credit wasn't built up yet. That was supposed to be temporary. When he was 25 and between jobs, I covered 3 months of rent so he wouldn't lose the place. When he was 27, I helped him buy a used Jeep because his old one blew a head gasket and he needed to get to work. When he was 29, I paid off $4,200 of credit card debt because the interest was eating him alive and I couldn't stand watching it. I'm not telling you this to make him sound like a bad person. I'm telling you because I need you to understand what I built and what I enabled. Every time I stepped in, I told myself it was what Sandra would have wanted. She was soft with him in a way I never quite managed. After she died, I think I was trying to be both of us. That's on me. I know that now. The Friday everything changed. I hadn't planned to go to the lake house at all. I'd had a routine cardiology appointment that morning. Nothing serious, just the annual check of the stent they put in 4 years ago. And the doctor told me my blood pressure was higher than he wanted to see it. He asked me what I was doing for stress. I told him I was retired. He gave me a look that said retirement doesn't mean what you think it means, and told me to get outside more. I called Kyle from the parking lot to tell him I was thinking of driving up to the lake for a few days. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail. I texted. Nothing unusual. Kyle had always been slow to respond. I figured I'd hear from him by the time I got on the highway. I stopped at home, threw some clothes in a bag, grabbed my fishing gear from the garage, and left Columbus around 2 in the afternoon. He still hadn't texted back by the time I hit Johnstown. I didn't think anything of it. The gravel driveway to the cabin is about a 1/4 mile off the county road, winding through the trees. I always loved that stretch. The way the light filtered through in the late afternoon. The way the world got quieter with every turn. I had the windows down. I was already feeling better. Then I came around the last bend and saw the cars. 3 of them parked in front of the cabin like it was a weekend cookout. A white Range Rover, a silver Audi sedan and Kyle's Jeep. I sat in my truck for a moment with the engine running, just looking. There were people on my porch. I could see them through the windshield. 2 adults sitting in my rocking chairs, a younger couple standing by the railing. I could hear music. Something playing from a Bluetooth speaker, the kind of afternoon gathering that had clearly been going on long enough for people to get comfortable. I turned off the engine and got out. The man in the rocking chair saw me first. He's around my age, silver-haired, the kind of tan you get from actual leisure time and not from working outside. He had a glass of something in his hand. He sat up a little straighter as I walked toward the porch steps. "Can I help you?" he said. Polite, but with an edge under it, the tone of a man who feels comfortable asking that question in a place he considers his own. "That's funny," I said. "I was about to ask you the same thing." The woman next to him, I assumed his wife, set down her own glass and looked at me with genuine confusion. The younger couple turned, and that's when I saw the girl standing next to Kyle. She was pretty composed, wearing a sundress and sandals and the particular expression of someone doing math very fast in their head. Kyle saw me a half second after she did. And here is the moment I will never forget for as long as I live. He didn't say Dad. He didn't say anything. His face went completely, perfectly still. The stillness of someone who has just realized that two separate realities are about to collide, and there is nothing left to do but stand in the wreckage. The silver-haired man stood up from the rocking chair. "I'm sorry. Are you a neighbour? Is there a problem with parking on the road? Because my son-in-law said—" "I'm not a neighbour," I said. "My name is Joe Mallory. I own this property." Silence. The woman's hand went to her chest. The younger girl, I'd learned her name was Aubrey, took a small step back. The silver-haired man looked from me to Kyle, with the slow, methodical movement of a person recalibrating everything they thought they knew about the last 48 hours. "Kyle," Aubrey said very quietly, "who is this?" "And my son, my 31-year-old son, who I had driven up here to surprise, who I had co-signed leases for, and paid down debts for, and watched over his entire adult life, said nothing. He looked at his shoes, actually looked at his shoes like a teenager who got caught skipping class. He said this was his family's property," the silver-haired man said. "He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the air in front of him, replaying something." "It is his family's property," I said. "It's my property, which makes it his family's property, in the sense that he is my family. But his name is not on the deed. His name has never been on the deed, and I haven't spoken to him since Tuesday, which is the last time I called to check in." Aubrey turned to Kyle. "You told us your grandfather left this to you." My son closed his eyes. "I want to tell you I felt rage in that moment. That would be a cleaner story. But what I actually felt was something much quieter and sadder, like watching a house you built settle wrong into its foundation. The crack has been there a long time. You just hadn't let yourself look at it." "Kyle," I said, "would you like to explain, or should I?" He opened his eyes. He looked at me, then at Aubrey, then at her parents. His jaw worked like he was testing sentences and rejecting them. "It's complicated," he finally said. The silver-haired man let out a breath. He set his glass down on the porch railing very carefully, the way men do when they're keeping themselves very controlled. "I'm Richard Holt," he said to me. "This is my wife Carolyn. I apologise. We were told, we were given the clear impression." "You don't have anything to apologise for," I said, and I meant it. I could see from where I was standing that the Holts were decent people who had been handed a fiction and accepted it in good faith. That happened to good people all the time. "We've been here since Thursday," Carolyn said. She wasn't angry. She sounded almost wounded. "Kyle said the property had been in your family since the 80s. He said his grandfather, that your father, had built the cabin himself." "My father sold insurance in Dayton and never held a hammer in his life," I said. "My wife and I bought this cabin in 1993. I have the deed, the tax records, and 30 years of property insurance statements that say so." Richard Holt turned to Kyle with the full, careful attention of a father-in-law who has just understood that this weekend has implications well beyond the weekend. "Son," he said, and the word had a weight to it, "I need you to help me understand what exactly is going on here." Kyle tried. I'll give him that. He started something about how he'd always thought of the cabin as family property, how he'd meant to clear it with me, but the timing didn't work out, how he hadn't technically lied so much as simplified. The sentences got shorter as he went. By the end, he'd trailed off into something that wasn't quite a sentence at all. "You told me you were taking me to your lake house," Aubrey said. Her voice was flat in a way that was worse than angry. "You told your family. You let everyone believe. Aubrey, your parents were going to come up next weekend," she said. "Did you think about that?" "I was going to figure it out." "Figure it out," she repeated. Richard Holt looked at me. "Mr. Mallory, I am deeply sorry for this intrusion. We had no idea. We would never have. This is your home, and we have been here for 3 days without your knowledge, and that is completely unacceptable regardless of what we were told." "I appreciate that," I said. "We'll pack our things immediately." "You're welcome to take your time and do it properly," I said. "I'm not in any hurry." That small grace seemed to mean something to him. He nodded and turned to Carolyn, and the two of them went inside to collect their belongings with a quiet efficiency that told me they were people who knew how to conduct themselves even when circumstances were humiliating. I respected them for it. Aubrey stood on the porch for another moment. She looked at Kyle like she was seeing him from a slightly different angle than she ever had before. Not fury exactly, more like reassessment. Then she followed her parents inside. Kyle and I were alone on the porch. He sat down on the top step, just folded himself down onto it like his legs had stopped working, and put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. He looked young. He looked like he was 17 and had just wrecked my car, except that it never actually happened, because at 17 I wouldn't have let him borrow the car without telling me. "I don't know where to start," he said. "I do," I said. I sat down in one of the rocking chairs, my rocking chairs, that Sandra and I had picked out at a craft fair in Granville the summer she finished chemo. The summer we thought we'd beaten it, and I looked out at the lake for a moment before I spoke. "How long have you been bringing people here without telling me?" Long pause. "This is the first time, Kyle." "It's the truth, Dad, I swear. I've thought about it before, but I never actually. Aubrey and I, her parents have this place on the Outer Banks they go to every summer, and I couldn't keep talking about the lake house without I don't know. I wanted them to see it. I wanted her to see it, and so you told her it was yours. I told her it was in the family. You told her grandfather built it with his own hands." He was quiet. "Her mother just told me that," I said. "My father sold insurance in Dayton for 35 years and retired to a condo in Sarasota. You met him 12 times. I know." "So where did you think this was going? Her parents were going to come up next weekend and then what? You were going to tell me last minute and hope I'd play along, or just hope I never found out?" He didn't answer that, and the not answering was its own answer. I want to stop here and be honest about something, because I think it's important. When Kyle finally started talking, really talking, the way he did after another 20 minutes, when the Holtz's Range Rover and Aubrey's Audi had both gone quietly down the driveway, he said some things that I had to sit with. He said he was embarrassed. Not of me, not of the cabin, of himself. He said that Aubrey's family had money in a way that was different from us. Not better, he said quickly, just different, more visible, and that being around them made him feel like there was some gap he was always trying to close. He talked about the apartment and the Jeep and the credit card, and how every time he'd needed help, he'd told himself it was the last time, and how every time it wasn't the last time he felt smaller, and how the cabin, this place that was genuinely beautiful, genuinely ours, felt like the one thing he could point to and say, "We have this. My family has this." I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. When he was done, I said, "I understand that. I want you to know I hear it. But I have to ask you something, and I need you to really think before you answer." He looked at me. "If Aubrey loves you," I said, "why does she need to believe you own a lake house to love you?" He didn't have an answer, but I could see it landing. We sat there until the sun was low enough that the light came across the water sideways and turned everything gold, the way it always does up here in the early fall. I've seen it maybe 200 times in 31 years, and it still does something to me. "I'm going to tell you what's going to change," I said. "Not as a punishment, just because it should have changed a long time ago and I kept letting it slide, and that was my failure as much as yours." He waited. "The apartment. You're 31 years old, that lease is in your name. You pay it yourself from now on. Full rent, first of every month, no grace period from me. Your car insurance, your phone bill, your credit cards, all of it. I'll give you 60 days to get sorted. After 60 days, I'm not covering any of it." He nodded slowly. He'd been expecting this, I think. Maybe even waiting for it. "And the lake house," I said. "This property is mine. I'm glad you love it. I'm glad Aubrey loves it. You are welcome here anytime you ask me first, in advance, with enough notice that I can plan. Not as a courtesy, as a condition, because this was your mother's place too, and it deserves to be treated with some respect." Something shifted in his face at the mention of his mother. He looked down at the water. "I know," he said, very quietly. "I don't think you meant to become this person," I said. "But I also think you knew, somewhere, that something was off. That's why you couldn't look at me when I walked up the driveway." He didn't argue with that. We didn't resolve everything that afternoon. I want to be honest about that too, because I've gotten tired of stories where one hard conversation fixes years of drift. Real life doesn't work that way. Kyle drove back to Columbus that night. I stayed. I sat on the porch for a long time after his taillights disappeared down the road, with my coffee going cold in my hand and the frogs starting up around the edges of the lake. I thought about Sandra. I thought about the 38 years I had with her, and the 14 months I spent watching her fight, and the 6 years since that I'd been carrying everything alone and calling it fine. I thought about all the times I'd written Kyle a check to make something easier, and how maybe I'd been doing that as much for myself as for him. Because it felt like doing something, and doing something was better than sitting with the fact that some things can't be fixed. A great blue heron landed on the dock around 9 o'clock. Huge, prehistoric-looking thing, just standing there on one leg in the dark like it had nowhere better to be. Sandra loved those birds. She used to say they were proof the world wasn't in as much of a hurry as we thought. I watched it for a while. There's a line between helping your kids and preventing them from becoming themselves. I spent 31 years thinking I was on one side of it and discovering that night that I'd been on the other side for longer than I wanted to admit. That's a hard thing to hold. I'm not going to dress it up, but here's what I know. The lake is still mine. The deed still has my name on it. In the morning I'm going to make coffee and sit on this porch and watch the fog come off the water. And it's going to be the same lake it was yesterday and the same lake it was when Sandra and I stood here in 1993 in our 30s. With the whole thing in front of us, trying to decide if we could afford to keep it. We couldn't, really. We did it anyway. 3 weeks after that Friday, Kyle called me. He'd had a conversation with Aubrey. A real one, he said. Told her everything, the lease, the debts, the way I'd been covering things. She didn't leave, but she told him she needed to know she was with the real version of him, not the one he thought she wanted. He got a part-time weekend job bartending on top of his regular work. He paid October rent himself, on time, first of the month. He texted me a screenshot of the confirmation without me asking. It was a small thing, but it was his. I texted back, proud of you. Lake's open when you want to come up. Bring Aubrey. He wrote back 3 minutes later. Thanks, Dad. We'll take you up on that. I read it twice, put the phone in my shirt pocket, went back to watching the water. Some things take a long time to turn around. That's okay, the lake doesn't go anywhere.